alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a new guest. Welcome to the show, Jerry Harwood.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, it's good to have you, Jerry. And tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and the kinds of books you write.
Absolutely. So I'm a fairly new writer. I've only been writing for about 2 years, and I've had several careers before then. My first career is I was a camp director, retreat center director, lived outdoors, raised my kids outdoors, absolutely loved it, lived on the lakes, the mountain areas. Mm-hmm. Got a little too old for that, and had a master's in counseling that I got through all that process, and ended up being a program director at a counseling center that worked with people in recovery. And I got tired of getting up at 4:30 every morning and having to be at work. And somebody asked me if I was interested in being a middle school teacher. So my third career here has been as a middle school teacher, and I've absolutely loved it. And one of the things it provided for me was a chance to stop making excuses. I'd had a whole life of I'd like to write a book someday. And never had, right? So all of a sudden I'm sitting there with 3 months off in the summer, nothing to do. And my wife's like, well, you did always talk about wanting to write a book. So what's your excuse, right? And, and she's like, you could do that or you could start doing the honey-do list. So off I went. But anyway, that's a little bit about me. I got 6 kids. Oldest 2 I adopted from Ukraine. Married, have a grandkid. I'm a volunteer fireman as well. That's my other hobby, is to be a little bit of a redneck and go play with big red trucks and fire hoses. So that's me.
Wow, nice. It sounds like you've lived quite a life, honestly. I mean, compared to me, anyway. I just was one of those guys who always wanted to be a writer and started right away, and that consumed pretty much my entire life up to this point.
Well, I wish I had started earlier because I just love it. I just absolutely love it. So, in retrospect, I envy you for that.
Oh, don't envy me too much. It's not. It's neither. It's the grass is always greener situation, I bet. So you have this book out. I shamefully I forget the name of the other one, but this 12 Hours on the Block book. What's that one about?
Sure thing. So 12 Hours on the Block is, you'd probably stick it in horror fiction. The indie publishing company wanted to put it out with Halloween for sure. Some people like kind of mash up ideas, and that helps them get their hands around the book. So this is sort of Prison Break meets Aztec mythology. And one of the things I teach in social studies is creation stories of different areas of the world. And I love the Aztec story. I just love it. There's this great scene in the Aztec story where the mother goddess sees a hummingbird feather, and she does what any of us would do. She eats it. And it becomes a living being inside her. And her other children think she has gone off and cheated on her husband, right? So they're going to kill their mom for being an adulterer. And it turns out the hummingbird feather comes out as a full-grown god warrior and kills his brothers.
Oh, wow.
and that sells great for middle school boys. Like, they just, they're like, this is the coolest thing ever. And so I just got this idea, like, what would happen if the hummingbird, right, that god, was just your tough guy in a prison cell, on the block.
Okay.
And so that was the start of it. And I started thinking, well, there's these other really cool gods in Aztec myth. And so what if I just gave each of them an hour, right? So everybody gets an hour, and we retell the creation story of Aztec mythology, but from a local American prison setting. So that's the idea in a nutshell.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I gotta say, the book description does not do it justice the way you just did, I don't think.
Well, thanks.
But maybe you look into putting something more like what you just told me on the book description, because I think that'd be nice. Because honestly, that sounds incredibly, maybe not up my alley because I don't read that much these days, but I should read more. But it's just really fascinating. It sounds a little bit like an urban fantasy kind of story, you know, one of those where the myths are real and stuff. Or is is it more of an allegory?
No, it's not an allegory at all. Yeah, it's much more urban fantasy. I'm a big fan of Neil Gaiman's what is it?
American Gods. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I don't think that I've just rewritten his story. By the way, I think
it doesn't sound at all like that.
But I really love that kind of writing. So and again, I'm a new writer, so I don't even always the indie publisher asked me what categories would I put it in, and they told me their categories, and I go, I didn't even know 2 of those were categories, so I'm all for you. I'm still learning all that, but urban fantasy, it probably does fit in there.
It's just urban fantasy is also a super competitive genre. Maybe that's why your publisher didn't want you in that one right off the bat. It's just like, this is the biggest, baddest genre in fantasy. I have some urban fantasy ideas out. I write fantasy and science fiction, but urban fantasy is one I'm not tackling just yet. You need a bigger base to come at that one.
Understand. That was probably their thinking.
I don't mean you, I mean me when I say that.
No, me too. So.
Yeah. So this book sounds really fascinating. I don't actually know that much about Aztec mythology beyond I know a little more about the late Aztec history, because that's pretty easy. It's conquistadors and stuff fighting Cortez and that kind of thing. But and most of that I learned from the video game Age of Empires 2.
That's where all of our good history comes from, isn't it?
Yeah, if you're in America and you don't want to learn about American history, sometimes it's kind of hard to find it, at least in school.
That's right. Now, one of the advantages of putting the story inside a prison, of course, is you can have these colorful characters, but you can also label them things people know. And so one of the goddesses of the Aztec mythology in my book, she's just a Hispanic Harley Quinn, and that's how she's described. And I think that's pretty apt. As you read about Aztec myth, you're like, I think I'm reading about Joker's girlfriend here. So
she flips out and murders people. She's this weird clown.
That's right. Yeah, like a brilliant doctor gone crazy. So anyway, all that said and done. It was a fun book to write. I really enjoyed writing it.
Yeah, is it a standalone, or are you planning to do more of them?
It was just done as a standalone. Actually, the way it all came about was I submitted a short story to an anthology this publishing company was doing, and they liked it, and they asked me if I'd turn it into a book. And I told them, I'm open for that. I'll talk about it. It's a book about pterodactyls in space.
Sounds good too.
Yeah, why not, right?
More on the silly side a little bit, but very funny. Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's a little more tongue-in-cheek, Buck Rogers style, right? But that said, they said, well, what else are you working on? I said, I've got this book, and I originally designed 12 Hours with my college roommate to be a graphic novel. We were talking about making it into a graphic novel, and he just stalled out with some life stuff. COVID came in, all this kind of thing. And I said, well, this is where I've got this thing sitting here. And they said, well, can we take a look at it? And they said, we'd love to print it out, as a long novella or a short novel, and give you the rights if you ever want to do the graphic novel. Go ahead and do that. So that was kind of how that came about, which was a fun process to work with them with. Three Ravens Publishing. They were just great. I mean, just great. I say great guys, but I think one of them's a girl.
Yeah. There's definitely some women involved with that publishing house.
Yeah, that's right. I don't actually. I've never actually met them, because of coronavirus. So.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with them from some previous interviews and stuff. Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So, a few of them anyway. Yeah. And yeah, so that sounds like that's a good, that's an interesting publishing story. Let me put it that way. You got a circuitous route there,
A little bit, yeah. So I did submit an actual query letter and all that, but yes, it was actually, and we say that, but I remember reading Stephen King's On Writing years ago, and he talks about cutting his teeth with articles to Playboy.
Yeah.
And put an article, and you think about Stephen King submitting a Playboy article, right? Like, what in the world? But that track to a novel sometimes does come through those short stories.
It does, yeah, and it changes, but it changes. Like the path to being a novelist, to write, writing novels for money, especially, changes a lot over time, or being, published.
Absolutely.
And I've heard it said, that by the people who broke in 20 years ago, even, they don't know how to break in now because it's all different.
That's right.
Everything's changing.
Everything I read says after the Kindle came out, the publishing world changed, right? And,
yeah.
And I would believe that. And I think that's entirely true. So, but I just say that to say it is a little bit of an odd thing, and certainly, to say I've broken into the top 5 or anything like that is would be a falsity. But
no, of course not. I mean, we're all new at this to some degree, right, too, and there's also one step at a time.
That's exactly it. Yes, my first book I self-published. Right. Okay. And I did that just so I could learn the ropes and kind of get something out there and, meet some people. And maybe I didn't do that right. I don't know.
No one does the first book right. Just take it from me.
That's right. So, and I didn't do the second one right either, but hopefully I did it righter. So we'll see. And hopefully the third and fourth, I'll get it a little even better.
Yeah. You just keep getting better. Honestly, when I started out, I put my first few books I published, they had just terrible covers. They were inaccessible, let me put it that way. Very weird fantasy, science fiction fantasy stuff that was, people just weren't able to read it was the biggest problem I had. And I don't think I've told this story too much on the podcast, but until I actually learned to make my own book covers, I was not really making much headway in the publishing career at all. And now I'm like, okay, I'm finally learning book descriptions. Like, there's so much to learn. It gets, especially when you publish independently, like I'm doing.
Right. And likewise, with an indie publisher, you're still doing a lot. And even tonight, I learned I need to go back and polish my back cover, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a back cover's really tough. I've been learning. That's the book description. I've been learning a ton about that lately, which is probably why it's on my mind. I'm like, that sounds like a good book description. You should use that. But because that's where my headspace is right now. I mean, there's nothing like. I mean, I was told actually by a previous guest of this podcast, Blaze Ward, in this one Facebook group we're both in. He mentioned how you should only basically focus on what's in your first chapter, and I forget the rest. This is why I'm not that good at book descriptions yet. But anyway, he's this big he writes a ton of sci-fi, so he's written a crap load of blurbs. Let me put it that way. And he knows a thing or two. But it's one of those things is like you want it very brief, like 50 words sometimes is too many.
Right.
These are really short, and it's surprising to me how effective they can be when you shorten them up and stick to the basics of just, this is the thing that your book is about.
Right. That's interesting.
But it's not a description of the book. Too. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, keep it to the first chapter was one I only heard from Blaze, and I'm not that good at keeping it to that one. Partially because I like to have short chapters, really. I'm not writing 5,000 word chapters here.
And I'm very similar to that, right? Anything I've written has pretty brief chapters, because I have 6 kids, and so I learned to read in short stints. And so I guess I write in short stints.
Yeah, you probably got a lot of irons in the fire.
That's right. But I mean, that was how I've always read. I remember taking kids to like Disney World and having a paperback in my cargo pants and read it while I was standing in line.
So did the Kindle help you out with that? You use a Kindle or a phone to read nowadays?
You know what? I do. I do have a Kindle. I have 2 because I bought one, and it was the backlit screen, and I just couldn't do it. And then I got one that doesn't have that backlight on it. It has a little bookworm light that attaches, and I like it a lot. So I read it at night. But I still love a paperback. That's my preference.
Okay. Yeah, I'm too rough with paperbacks. That's why I've kind of grown up. The Kindle's really grown on me. And I've read a fair amount on my cell phone, too, because the Kindle app on there makes it pretty easy.
And I have read some on my phone, so I'll have those. And again, certain
however you can, right?
That way. That's right. That's
Read
right.
it how you got it.
And I'm rough on paperbacks too. I don't treat them well. I don't collect them. But that is my preference.
just disposable paperback. No, it's cool. I'm not trying to point fingers or accuse or anything. Yeah, it's just like, this is paperback. I'm going to enjoy you and use you up.
I have a friend who cringes every time he sees me just dog ear a page.
Ooh.
And he's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? I'm like, well, that's where I'm stopping. So I'm going to bookmark it. And he goes, get a bookmark. I'm like, no.
Just get a damn bookmark. Come on, Jerry.
Anyway, what are you going to do?
Oh, it's funny. Yeah. So as far as that goes, you did mention your other book. What's your that other book you got out about?
So I'll give a real brief backstory there. When I first decided to start writing, I found a writing group in my local area, and I joined them. And I asked them. I said, "Okay, I want to start writing. What should I write?" And they said, "Write what you know." Right? Write what you know. Well, I was a middle school teacher, and I had spent a career in the counseling world. And so I said, well, there it is. So I wrote a middle grade contemporary fiction, think Diary of a Wimpy Kid type thing. And it's a kid who gets moved in the middle of a school year. So new school, but everybody else is settled in. And the first friend he meets is the school bully. And so,
that's a premise right there.
Yeah, that's right. So he has to figure this out, right? Like, who is he going to be in middle school, and that kind of thing. Sort of a Tales of Fourth Grade Nothing but Judy Blume-esque feel. And it was a fun write, but it was definitely writing things that I knew and saw every day. I think I'm like you. I prefer horror and sci-fi and fantasy, and I haven't written anything like it since. I got 3 books kind of in the works at different stages, and haven't gone back to that world, but it was what I knew, so I wrote it. And
hey, you can't say anything worse. I mean, it's not a bad thing to write a book that that's a little down to earth for starters. It probably helps you get the grounding. Honestly, I kind of wish I'd done something like that. Again, it's a grass is greener situation because my first book was this big giant space opera book. Like literally, people were fighting giants. And I've come full circle because now I'm writing about space giants again on the side.
Nice. Well, the book I wanted to write was this. I love King Arthur. And I love fantasy, and I thought, well, I'd love to write King Arthur in a fantasy, setting. But yeah, that was the advice I got, was don't write that one first, Yeah. And I thought that was good advice, and you always come back to it, right? You always come back to your space giants, but that was good advice for me. On the cover side, my cover was done by one of my students, and I think he just did a phenomenal job. And I probably didn't do it justice turning it into a cover. But the illustration he did, just phenomenal. So super happy with that. If I could go back, I'd probably redo the presentation around it.
Well, it's an independently published book. You could do it again. You could replace that text, right?
Sure.
I mean, presumably, yeah. I mean, I've recovered my books a lot of times, at least some of them, because I did such a gross job the first time. Yeah. But I mean, and that's a story a lot of independent writers deal with. It's like, oh yeah, that one. And if the worst you're doing is the text or whatever, the presentation the cover isn't that great. Well, then you're not in that bad shape.
Right.
It's important stuff, but it's also not the sort of thing that's going to be that hard to fix.
No, it's not too bad. And I have done one edit already, so just a few little items here and there. It turned into an Audible book, and the Audible guy said, you call this one guy Coach McHart in one place, and he's Coach McHart spelled differently in another, and I'm like,
yeah.
Paid an editor to help me, and I went through it, and obviously there's always something. So
yeah, tell me about it.
Which was part of the joy for me of putting out 12 hours, because I had a team that helped me with those kind of things.
Yeah.
And that was superb. They did a great job.
Yeah, I've never worked with a publishing company, and that sounds like, even if it's not the most Cadillac level company, it's still got to be a real luxury, honestly. I mean, so yeah, good for you.
Well, it is, and you know, I'm in a position where I'm a full-time teacher, and I teach
Mm-hmm.
a college class too. So this is still, you know, the hobby slash might someday be a job for me. I'd love for it to be something I could, you know, generate income with, but at this point in time in my life, it's still hobby. So,
Yeah.
you know, when you golf, you or fly fish or whatever, you always like to pay someone to do the part you don't enjoy. So,
Yeah.
so they took a cut of the book, and I didn't have to pay them. So that was a nice, you know, it was a good setup for me. It may not be for every indie author who is looking to make profit off, because you don't make the profit. But you know, in my circumstance, it was a good fit. I don't know that it will be for the next book, but for this one, it was.
Hey, you know, I mean, and that's really good. You know, you know where you're at. You know, and there's nothing wrong with treating it like a hobby or as a side project for a while. You know, or
That's
forever,
right,
even
yes.
if that's what you want to do. If that's what ends up being the way you do it, that's just how it goes. You know,
Right.
and having a hobby that makes you a tiny bit of money is better than having a hobby that eats a ton of money. Let me put it that way.
That's exactly it, isn't it? So, and you know, again, I have summers off, so it looks much more like a job for 3 months a year, and then it turns into something a lot less in the rest of the year. So I've tried to write in the summer, and then I edit in the fall, and that's been a pretty good system for me.
Yeah, you said you've only been running for 2 years. You came out with a book each year. That's not bad.
That's right. Yeah. So I've done all right, I guess. 2.5 years now, but yeah, I've done.
No, 2.5. Yeah. Because I mean, like when I started out, and granted, I was a teenager. I started writing when I was like 13, but I wrote a book about a book a year for a while there, and that I kind of slowed down for a little bit during college, but then I sped back up afterward. And it is a book a year is a respectable rate. Let me just put it that way. You get experience pretty quick that way. Though, of course, it's nothing like some of these people who just blow it out of the water, like 30 books a year, like insanity like that. I don't know, man. I've never done that. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah. Well, you know, some of my friends in my writing group are doing this tells you how new I am. I didn't even know it was a thing. They're like, are you doing nano or whatever? And
NaNoWriMo, yeah.
That's right. And I'm like, is that like Mork and Mindy, you know, like Robert Williams from the 70s? And they're like, no, you have to write a whole book in November. And I go, I don't have to write a whole book in November.
No, not doing that, no. Not during school, man, no.
That's right. But they're doing it. But, you know, I just found out it was a real thing this year. So
yeah,
it's been so much fun for me to meet people, network, and become part of a community of writers. And I'll tell you what's fun about it is, you know, we all want people to read.
Mm-hmm.
And so if people read my book and they get excited about yours, or they read yours and get excited about mine, I mean, if we make people readers, we all win. So
yeah.
That's a cool piece when you think about the people that you're in quote competition with. You're really not.
No, absolutely. That's a really good refrain. Honestly, I've heard that one from a few indie authors, from a few authors, period, and it's so true. Because the key here is not that you're exploiting like a limited number of people. It's more like we're just trying to all reach more people, get more people to pick books up, you know, and then there you go. But I wanted to say though that geez, am I going to lose it? Am I going to embarrass myself on the podcast? I think I already did. No.
It's deep in, so it'll just be to your loyal listeners.
Yeah, at this point, anyone who's still listening can put up with this. No, I was going to say, though, it's interesting to me because you have this, we as writers approach this like, okay, you can even if you're a hobbyist, if you're not, but either way, when you get into the writing world, when you get into any skill, you're learning something, and there's this whole other world there. It kind of gives you a new aspect, a new way to look at everything. I think that's really fascinating because I've just been, full disclosure, like I said, I've been writing for, 17, 18 years. So this is kind of, my business, my job. But then recently, and granted, this is something I was into as a kid too, but I just started like paying more attention to model miniatures, like war games models. like Warhammer 40,000, that sort of thing. I started doing trying to build and paint more of those things as a hobby, and there's a whole world there too. There's a whole other side thing that just if you don't know what you're looking at, you'll never find it.
That's right. I played with those back in the late 70s, early 80s. And my best friend, one of my two best friends in the world, I remember going to his house as a kid, and he had this piece of plywood above his bed on chains, and he had this little hand crank, and he could crank it down. And he had mountains and ogres and all the Lord of the Ring miniatures, and that's what his dad and he did. And I actually took my kids. He lives about 2 hours away. I've taken my kids several times down to his house because he produces them. He makes them now and sells them. That's his side hobby. And I've taken them down there several times to play rounds of games and during my off time. So I'm right there with you. That's a fascinating group of people and a fascinating world and a fascinating thing to get involved in, either as a hobby or as a side job or as a career. So
there's so much depth to all these things. It's whether it's writing or tiny little plastic or metal models.
That's right.
So we are running a little low on time. So can you give people a book recommendation? You said you're a big reader, and it sounds like you are, actually. I mean, I'm never doubted you.
Okay, well, thanks. I always have been. So I've been reading. I read across the board, and I really do try to read across the board. I just finished Hello Universe, which was a fun read. It is kind of a middle grade young adult book. I also finished the Michael Sullivan series, Age of Empires, and I just finished it about a month ago, and I wish I hadn't. It's one of those series that was so good. You wish it was either a book 4 or you wish you had slowed down. And I just can't. His Rhaenyra Chronicles, same way. I can't recommend them enough. They were a fun, good read. So those are the two things most recent. I am reading Stephen King's The Outsiders because I want to watch the HBO series, but I thought I ought to read it first.
Hey, fair enough. Yeah. Well, yeah, but Michael Sullivan.
The way down with that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Michael Sullivan kicks some major ass. I've heard that on a lot of levels. I need to check him out more thoroughly at some point, his books. Because that's right up my alley, right, I think. Right in my genre.
Oh, his opening, that first, he had me in like the second chapter.
Well, there you go.
So good. And I love the series. It was a fun series. And he's an author that in his afterward, he invites you. He just says, "Hey, if you're ever in this part of the world, email me. Maybe we could get together and talk about whatever." So I've never done it, but he seems to be a guy who enjoys talking to fans and enjoys talking to people who are reading his books.
Well, cool. Yeah, I might have to look into those books myself because I've been hearing about him for a long time, and I'm like, okay. One of these days,
That's right. And then I guess the other one I really enjoy is Bernard Cornwell, but I usually read them on Audible.
Okay.
I never know if Audible counts as a read or not. So
that counts. It counts. Anything could be.
Does it count?
When I was an English major in college, I was told that everything is a text, so you can count anything as reading.
Okay.
That includes movies and video games.
Fair enough. Well, in that case, I read Green Eggs and Ham to my grandson, too. So we'll throw that on the list.
Hey, Dr. Seuss, not to be sniffed at. Especially the Green Eggs and Ham. Anyway, yeah. All right. Jerry, thanks for being on the show. Remind people where they can find your stuff. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Oh, no, I just said I appreciate it. Yes, go ahead.
Remind people where they can find your work online, and if you have a website or something you want to send them to, tell people about it.
I sure do. So the website is jerryharwood.com. JERRYHARWOOD, so just one D.com. I have a blog at circumlocution.net, nothing like a fancy word. And you can find my stuff on Barnes & Noble's Nook, Indie Press, but also on Amazon. If you like Amazon, it's easy to go there and get that on Kindle or to get it in paperback. So you can find me there. I have an author page and all that stuff you're supposed to have.
Well, sweet. thanks for being on the show. It's been fun. And it's as for this podcast, you can find more of us at mentalcellarpublications.com. You can find my books at timneedawriter.com. Yeah, that's a pun on my name in the site title there. And you can find out all about my stuff. You can get all my books on Amazon.com. And, by the way, now I'm actually wide with my paperbacks. A bunch of my paperbacks should be coming out across the internet. So, yeah, thanks to Drafted Digital for that. I really appreciate their service. And if you're an author and you're struggling with getting your paperbacks out to all the sites you can put them on, just, check them out. Give them a thought. All right, thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good week.